here, it's going to start recording in a second, but I'll send over just to that same. Do you want Contact Ed Empowered? I'll send over that same link of the video.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Perfect. So mainly, I think I've interacted with you a couple of times throughout the sphere, and you've interacted with some people that I know pretty well. But the stuff that popped up that you wanted to defend in the DMs, I think, or defend in conversations or talk it out, were some older tweets, and like older as in past couple years or current, and things like, "This is not organized by blacks. This is organized by anti-American, Antifa terrorists. They're manipulating the black community." Things like that, which are super. There's a lot of inherent implied presumptions on what the black community does and doesn't know, who's manipulating the black community, how valid the people's grievances and what they believe are in statements like that. And it can be entirely on things like, hey, it's the internet. I sometimes say shit to be provocative, or I firmly believe this because this is what I think is an inherent problem in communities. And I don't know where you fall in that spectrum, but like I am pretty straightforward as a person in terms of like there's way too much bullshit online that I've got a very short rope for it. That I'm like, nah, man, that's not worth it. If it's bait, it's bait. Fuck off. And if it's not bait, that's rooted in so much fundamental. I wouldn't even call them untruths, but they're misrepresentations of what's happening in certain parts of both history and society and socioeconomics, that we're not going to get to the point where we're breaking it down on 150 word count Twitter threads.
Exactly.
Yeah. So like, we can go over the 4 that I think Mansa posted. That was the I think that was the catalyst for the conversations. Think the no, I'm not saying I'm not saying all black people don't value education. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Do you want to spend? Do you want to unpack that first one?
Yeah, I think that's the clearest way to go. Instead of it'll get lost in the weeds.
Yeah. So that one comment was made in response to a friend that was calling out the negative aspects of the rioting and attributing the violence and the crime that took place during those events. He was attributing those to, and I think he used the word black community. And I really don't use that phrase black community because I have multiple generations of friendships with various groups of black people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not up to me to define what is the quote unquote black community. But that quote, that tweet was in response to one of my friends attributing like I said, those negative aspects of the rioting to the black community. And I was like, no, that's not the case. And what I based my statement on was watching mainly Portland and Seattle and Chicago, but all over the country, watching what took place from, let's say, 11 p.m. to like 3 a.m. on a nightly basis for about 200 straight nights. And the people that I saw destroying and being destructive were not, quote unquote, part of the black community. The people that I saw being destructive and in the communities were not those people, and that was the statement that I was making there.
So if I remember correctly, and I'm just going to pull it up so we're not, trying to quote from memory, because that just makes things difficult. But it was a Jesse Lee Peterson who is, we'll give him the best benefit of the doubt and call him mildly far right, and a mild provocateur, in terms of both how he makes his money and the attention he garners. But
I don't know
um,
that. And when I hear things about far right, like I don't know what far right means.
Far right means in terms of their political ideology and the policies and social representation that they support. I don't care what they say. What do they vote for? What do they support? That really comes down to it. I know a lot of people who will call themselves center left or center right, but if they spend their time and energy attacking the vast majority of the left and supporting the far right, they're far right. That's where's your energy going? What's your vote going to? What do you spend your energy supporting? Everything else is, for me, fluff. And
gotcha. Okay. Well, I think what I mean is I don't know where he's, maybe a better statement for me to say is I don't know where he spends his energy.
Oh, yeah. No, he spends his energy. For lack of a better term, Jesse Lee Peterson is a far right blowhard. And on the right of Rush Limbaugh in terms of race provocateur, conservative Christian nationalism,
conflict consumerism,
mainly in terms of both how he makes his money and how he garners attention. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I feel very comfortable saying that, like, that's exactly who he is. But here, let me share a window. Let's see. So, like this one, this is from Jesse Lee Peterson. And this isn't talking about the vast majority, we'll say 96 to 97% of the protests were peaceful. And that's millions and millions of people. And they found that more than a few of the escalations were done by, Proud Boy style alt-right groups that were looking to both escalate conflict and then blame it on peaceful protesters. So, like, the protests themselves were definitely organized by Black people. They're organized by a lot of people, but by, the vast majority of Black activists and Black people in those communities who wanted to talk and stand up to something and speak up for something. The insidious part isn't that you're saying anything against by the look of it some type of looting. It's that the manipulating part. They are manipulating the Black community. Like, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is that these elements that he mentioned here, BLM and Antifa, and the people that were ratcheting up the violence, those causes, that those organizations are actually, when I say manipulating, I mean they are using human tragedy to advance their political causes. And that's a statement that I believe. I believe that those political organizations are using human tragedy to advance a political ideology and not solve human problems.
Okay, so that's skipping over a little bit, but first off, the presumption in there is that BLM and Antifa were pivotal to any type of rioting and looting.
When I want to go back and say, I watched for nearly 200 consecutive nights, I watched those violent elements on a nightly basis.
I don't know if that's representative, my man. The elements, unless you were, I was in.
It was representative of the elements that were doing the violence and destruction.
Representative. Yes.
That's the. I'm not when I'm talking about this, but looting, rioting, and allowing those people to destroy. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay, so back it up first for a second, because there's two separate things. The by representative, I mean representative of the cause itself. So if you're undermining and saying that the cause problematically has these things, and they would be better off if they protested without these things, right? Is that fair? Like, the protest would have been better if they didn't have the looting and the rioting at any point in time. Is that not what he's saying here? And what you're saying, that the looting and rioting wasn't organized by the blacks. Is that not true?
Say that again.
You're saying that the at scale, for the movement itself, for the protests themselves, they would have been better if they hadn't had any issues with the looting and the rioting, right?
Like if I had to say, you know what would be a good idea?
No. This is what's this saying right here. Like, what's saying on this page, what he is saying, and what you're commenting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If there's a way to remove.
I'm not asking about what, like, potential. I'm saying what's being said here on this post is, hey, if they had done this way, it would have been better. If they had done this without the looting and the rioting, and allowing BLM and Antifa to escalate and destroy property, it would have been better, is what Jesse Lee Peterson is saying. And you're saying that destruction isn't organized by the blacks, it's by anti-American Antifa terrorists that manipulate the black community. Like, that's okay, that's fair. Like, I'm not trying to misrepresent you. I'm saying, like, hey, he's saying this would be better. You're saying this is what happens. This is what happened, and this is why.
Yes.
I'm saying that, okay, in that scope, if you're both representing the protests themselves and what you viewed on the protests, you said you viewed for 200 days straight. You probably saw on the news I would assume at some point.
I didn't watch the news, but I watched live feeds of the protest.
Okay, but from people, I assume.
Yeah, from just independent people with video cameras that were there posting live stream.
Okay, so by every credible and even semi-credible report, plus 96 to 97% of the protests were peaceful. That I don't think that's not something we can argue against. That's very true.
That's not something that I'm even okay. I'm not arguing.
So, yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't say we were arguing. I'm just saying, as a statement, by every credible report, plus 96, 97% of the protests are were peaceful. And especially protests by population, aren't inherently organized actions by groups and communities. So I would like to know, like, what do you guys mean? Say there were bad actors. Say there were actors that were there specifically to rile up and antagonize. Given how mass populations work, and the vast majority of people work without crowds, and if they get antagonized by militaristic forces and police forces, they respond back, because that's how all crowds have worked for all time. Ignore all of that. Say just specifically that they're an organized group of millions of people that have a decentralized communication structure. As in, like, there's no command hierarchy there. There are people that go out to protest, and they're slowly and surely trying to find a way to organize that. How would you how would you get better than 96%? How would you get better than 90% peaceful? Like, I would like to see what that. I don't understand. Every time I've seen this type of criticism of mass protests, especially mass protests of that type of scale, but even on a small scale, how do you
Where
guys?
am I? But I don't. You're. I feel like you're placing a lot on me that's not there. For
What do you mean?
example, I because I'm not making I haven't made a judgment call on these protests. I didn't even say these protests were awful.
I didn't want to say that.
You know what I'm saying?
I'm
I
talking
don't.
specifically about the issue that both Jesse is saying is there in terms of the violence and the looting,
Yes.
and your response in terms of like, this is why that's there. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, if it, assuming that both of you are 100% correct, is there an idea? What always loses me in that conversation is, how do you guys think, outside of stopping people who were looting and rioting, which people did, how do you guys think they should have gone about it? Like, is there an idea in your head?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a wonderful question. I think what the most confusing part
Mhm.
of all of the protest and the movement, the most confusing part for some people is that there are two competing philosophical ideologies.
Okay.
One is for the rights of the individual, and then one believes that the rights of the individual is essentially the cause of injustice, and that's the BLM Antifa collectivist ideology. To the core of that philosophical idea, its purpose to erode the classical liberal enlightenment era.
That's not
And
correct, but that's I want to hear you. I want to hear you flesh that out. I want to hear the one and the two, so to make sure I'm hearing you correctly.
what the one and the two, the different
Yeah, you said there were two competing. Yeah.
there's two competing worldviews, and one is the rights of the individual, which is essentially really historically the collection of the best ideas of human progress. And perhaps it took humanity, I mean, I guess as a whole species, we're still not really there, but probably about the late 1990s to really kind of actualize this idea of what the Enlightenment era classical liberalism framework was meant to be. But the current ideological framework is purposed to erode that.
Okay.
And that's part of that's why there's conflict, and what we've done is most people in their hearts and minds believe that they are practicing and marching for individual rights, but really what the philosophical framework is doing is marching against individual sovereignty. And most people don't fully recognize that the movement is an anti-human freedom movement, because one thing it does socially is it divides us into these groups based off of political beliefs, based off of skin color, based off of gender, based off of ideology, and it forces us to see other people as an other. And when it does that, it cultivates our human capacities for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. So if I were tasked with, okay, how do we get these human rights? Like, what do we do? And that's really what I'm trying to do now. Is my whole mission is getting 86+% of us together, because our species is at a crux, man. We are really, really at a crux here.
So
And I would be for something. Sorry to answer your question. Like,
yeah.
what would you do? I would be for something. And that thing that I'm for is human dignity. And how do we get each other to connect on that deep level of human dignity? And that's one of the big things that I talk about, is we have to be for something. If we're only against something, we're only going to get destruction. And right now, we're destroying ourselves. And I've seen it really intensify over the past 5 years. 5 years ago, I started going to people like, man, the way that we're organized and we're destroying each other right now. And we've been put in this really shitty spot, and we've got to figure out how to get out of it, and what is the future of our species going to look like.
So we're on a bit of a tangent, but would you say that you're working backwards then? Because like if your issue with, I guess, if I hear you correctly, anti-racist, we'll just put that under the umbrella. Anti-racist,
The current framing of anti-racism.
I don't know what you mean by that, but we'll say we're talking in the current
the Kindi version.
Anti-racist is that you're not sure what they are for, is that they're just against things and they're not central in human dignity, and fundamentally what they are doing is undermining the individual.
And not just undermining, but seeking to basically destroy the concept of the individual.
How? We're off 3 legs a bit on the original question, but like that seems to be something very important and like fundamental in how you feel about the topic, and you kind of build how you feel about other things from that. So like let's ask how specifically is dismantling things built with race in mind, race and prejudice in mind, problematic for individuality?
I'm curious. I would have to know what you are like. What is something specifically you're talking about? Because if there's a barrier to human potential in place, I'm down with examining that and removing it.
Okay.
So if there's, you know what I'm saying?
We can go as surface level as qualified Black applicants have to change their names to get interviews for jobs, and that's been proven in, we'll say, studies multiple times over the past 10 to 15 years. Similar for housing and housing sales and housing appraisals, for changing both who you are and what you are when you're selling and getting a higher appraisal for your things, to multiple banks getting caught out for not giving or giving higher rates to qualified Black families. And then, getting a slap on the wrist, but for them, it's a cost of business later on. Like there's structural things that are fundamental to how society works in terms of the big basics, education, transportation, access, healthcare, that have structures that weren't, even if they weren't specifically built with race in mind, now they've got foundations that were built with race in mind a long time ago, i.e. redlining for our housing and housing property, and how that's changed, and how we take care of both where and when we do public transit. All of that It's fundamental infrastructure for how society is built. You know what? You know what's a good easy one? The GI Bill. A big portion of America's middle class was built off the GI Bill after World War II.
No, I know.
Yeah. So I'm saying, let's
so
let's do a real easy one.
What I want to do is I want to agree and say, yeah, I don't like any of that.
I don't think you support any of it, but I'm
so what I'm
dismantling things like that is undermining the individual.
But how is that dismantled?
People have been trying. It's not dismantled. That's the problem.
Like I think what it seems is there is just this. Well, not seems it is from my observations. There's only focus. There's focus and talk of dismantling. And then, okay, this is what I figured out maybe around the time of this tweet, because during these years, I was going to anti-racism workshops. That used to be diversity, equity, inclusion, and that used to be what I did with my job.
Yeah.
And I started noticing all we talk is just dismantling, and I look at postmodernism as just like deconstructing and dismantling, and then there is this violent, the violent expression of the dismantling are the people out there actually destroying.
That's not true.
One of the
real quick, 1 second. Because if you're going to workshops already, that's an expression of that dismantling, and then the policy people push are expressions of dismantling. There's always going to be I'm not going to judge the right by every person that fucking decides to shoot up a school or blow up a hospital. I'll judge the right on fucking compounding that probability by the messaging they put out. But I'm not going to say everyone there is that, because that's disingenuous and it's not the heat of the argument. But the policy people push, I think, is. Let's go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm not saying all people.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is the idea, the tools that the people are using are purpose for destruction. So that's why there's no.
What do you mean by that? Like, because purpose for destruction and violence only like evokes certain imagery, and like we got to be specific here if we're going to talk about things like that. We're going to call an ideology like that's its direction. Let's hash out the problem with it.
I think the problem with the ideology that I see is that it just speaks of words about dismantling and destruction, and what it's seeking to really destroy is that classical liberal Enlightenment era. And it's not just happening. It's not just a United States thing.
That's not. No, we're not going to broaden out. That's a separate conversation. But like, how is it destroying classical liberal Enlightenment? That's a real broad, like,
because it labels every virtue, value, and thought associated with classical liberalism, the Enlightenment era. It labels that as elements of white supremacy.
Like what?
Objective truth.
It labels all objective truth as white supremacy?
Yes.
Okay.
That theory, that notion, objective truth, is white supremacy. The notion of individualism, and nobody ever got to explain beyond the words, but individualism is deemed white supremacy. Like all of those things.
I think what's happening as I'm listening to what seems to both frustrate you about the word and anti-racism, the world and anti-racism, and your experience with it, is that there's a conflation between a bunch of ideologies, and the communication of what's happening isn't crossing paths for you. So like, and it clicked for me when you said individualism as a individualism versus collectivism, and how you talk about. I think you've talked quite a bit about Marxism and white people and black people, and that's a whole separate conversation. But quite specifically, do you think when people talk about collectivist uprisings, they're trying to undermine your individual identity
Not my individual identity,
or
but
royal?
the
Yeah.
yeah, the I think what really, the thing that worries me
Mhm.
is that future human beings will not have, they definitely won't have the level of sovereignty that we'll have today, but even there'll be even more centralized powers con- controlling what they can and can't do.
What do you mean by that? Like, who is there a policy pushing that? Is there like
Yes, if you look at uh, what what's coming out of the World Economic Forum, and especially as they talk about the fourth industrial revolution, the merging of the basically the merging of the biological, physical, digital worlds, and a complete surveillance
okay, so what
state.
your actual issue is with burdening late stage capitalism. It has absolutely nothing to do with fucking anti-racism. Like that shit is
No,
gonna that's just a general word.
well, no, so what I see anti-racism and how diversity, equity, and inclusion are being framed is the cultural reworking and reorganizing
Okay.
for the actual collectivist policies
Yeah,
that is being worked on and integrated right now.
got it. And your fear
So
is that that's
so
going to be abused on the capitalist side to group people as an individual and integrate and control. Because yeah, you're right. In the next two generations of technological revolutions is integrated technology. Sure, integrated technology, AI with integrated technology. We're gonna have to figure out a fuck ton to do with how people work, where people work, and we've got more than enough money and food and water for everyone right now, and we can have a free market on top of it. But we know that's not how people work. So, what are we going to do when people aren't out of work because they're not trying, but because there's just not work for them because we have robots that can do it? Sure. Um, I can understand that. I can dive deep in all of those topics. I'm deeply familiar with both manufacturing and construction and AI. But where I'm lost, where you're losing me a little bit, is collectivist movements who they're collectivists in terms of collectivist power. They're not saying the individual doesn't matter. They're saying, uh, as a labor force, as a union, like that's one of the main tenets of the reason Marxist theory is so prevalent in Black liberation is because the one of the main tenets was we don't get liberation without getting liberation for all poor people, and that means getting liberation for white poor people and Black poor people, and we get together, and that's how you break down barriers of race because we're all being subjugated by this oppression. Um, and that's why it's so intertwined, because so much of Black liberation is along those same lines of like, look, we're a minority, and yes, there are race issues and class issues that umbrella over everything, um, but that collectivism doesn't mean that those individuals don't matter. And so that's where, like, well, I'm crossing in the night sky, just not getting with you.
Uh,
Does that make sense? Like,
it does make sense, but I try to just use the two frameworks
yeah,
because one, and a lot of people in their minds cross over and use both.
uh,
Uh, as you were talking, what came to my mind was right now. I'm hoping I see that 86, like I'm going to go back to that 86% plus of us, not just Americans, but like most of humankind right now,
mm-hmm.
as a collectivist group that needs to come together right now for the sheer sake of our species. That's
Okay,
kind of that's kind of that's kind of where I'm at. I see us right now divided up into groups, clamoring at each other for resources and power,
mm-hmm.
while ultimately it's going to be all of us that are fully under control.
Fully under corporate power. Oh, okay, so I feel like you're just like a Marxist minus a couple steps.
Mm, I would say no.
Huh?
I guess I don't really have a political home, but
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think
politically,
you believe what you believe. As I
polit,
said at the beginning, I don't. I
politically, I guess as of right now, I cannot support the state in any capacity,
what's
but
that mean?
uh, this, I cannot support a Republican. I cannot support a Democrat. I
Okay,
cannot support,
I mean, that's fair. I just needed to
you know,
like
I
hear
I
what you meant
can't
by like.
support the all of those agencies.
Yeah,
I can't support wars that they're doing. I can't
fair.
support what they put on tele. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
So
get you. You there's an inherent evilness if you're determined to be consistent in both your morals and your ethics in both running a country and a country's history. Um, and you have to be mildly okay with that and move towards adjusting adjusting both the parameters, but lowering the percentages instead of absolutism. If you're going to fucking vote for anyone, um, the and so I understand being at the point where like, no, I just can't. Like, I don't agree with it. Cool, I understand that. But in terms of like uh, baseline ideology, what you would like to see is uh, collective unity by the working class to avoid being overly controlled. Is that fair?
yeah, and not necessarily us. I don't want to put any fear on, like, oh, I don't want somebody controlling me.
Yeah.
I'm almost 47. I'm probably, I'm halfway done. I think that it's really, really important for us to consider
I'm gonna stand up.
what is what's happening to our species, and do we have a unique time to come together and do some real serious problem solving and coming together, because
Okay.
tick tock.
So how do we come together without fixing the fundamental base building blocks of society? So, and if I say like, hey, the history of public education was drawn on racial lines. If you peer that out with how public education is funded through property taxes, how property taxes and values are done. Long story short, it ends up having pretty severe racial lines, whether you believe it or not. That's how it was built, and it's not a fairy tale, but whatever. It's how it is now. How do you fix those things? How do you fix things built with race in mind without thinking about race when you're fixing
them? I would say whatever the thing is, and right now everybody needs to examine what thing they are involved in, because as people, we're all in the system somewhere.
Yeah.
So to ask ourselves, which set of tools, which set of ideas, which philosophies, which practices are we going to put into our systems so that we can get the results that we want. And I don't know if you know this about me, but one of the things that I've done is I've developed a set of attitudes and practices designed to strengthen the traits that are the most best within our innate human being qualities and mitigate those capacities of prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. So I've developed these set of ideas, and I work with school districts, and I will work with businesses to help get these. How do we systemize human dignity? How do we systemize strengthening our common humanity? How do we build from this point forward on? What do we do? So I've developed a set of ideas that I'm trying to get out into the world.
Okay, but even how do we build from this point forward on is, I think, always valuable. And I think with the size of populations, it's never going to be one solution. It's going to be a fundamental idea of solutions and 1,000 ways, 1,000,000 ways to applicate it. That's not how you use that word, but fuck it, to apply it. But mainly, how do you get past breaking down the problems of the past that still run our world? Like, even if a good maximum lazy example is compounding wealth. Say your grandfather and my grandfather, as I said, things like the GI Bill, both served in the military. My grandfather applied for the GI Bill and couldn't get it. Your grandfather did. Your grandfather was allowed to build foundations of wealth that have compounded over, fucking almost 100 years, have laid foundations for your family, where my grandfather did the same, went to school, got into debt, did all of his things, but didn't have that fundamental American fucking booster shot of stability and wealth that everyone else did.
I didn't.
And it changes how generations work.
Right.
So if everyone's like, no, I'm saying this is a hypothetical. So, all right, cool. If we want to start from scratch, but that scratch comes with very, very different foundations that are there currently, right? So, like, you ever hear the
I want to push back a little bit.
On what? It's a hypothetical. I'm
right.
saying, like, how
but we are also all living on the shoulders of giants that came before us.
That's not true. I mean,
that is true. I mean,
we're living on the shoulders of giants, but some shoulders got help and some shoulders didn't.
But we're all sitting. You are sitting in a shelter with electricity. You probably have clean water. I've got a safe, comfortable place to sleep at night. I'm just saying.
What does that have to do with? I'm not saying. Yeah, we're both not just because we're not dying doesn't mean thriving is being set by the same standard. And I think that's a very, our entire financial system is built on how interest works and compound interest over time. And the longer those time you undermine an entire community's ability to build wealth, the longer they can't build that wealth. So at its base,
I'm curious what your solutions, what you see would be a way to fix that.
I think we invest aggressively in all the, specifically in the areas that have been excluded. I think we, as a country and as multiple communities, undermine and underserve people because it's easier to have a hierarchy than it is to skim a percent off the top to give base foundations for everybody else. I think it's dumb on the human moral side. I think it's dumb on the ethical side. I think it's dumb on the economical side. It's if you were a selfish capitalist, the best thing you could have in the world is everybody participating in the market. So you subsidize the things that allow them to participate in the market fully. You get them to and from home for free. You subsidize basic public transportation so they can go to school, go to work, go out to downtown. Easy. You get the base level of food, education, transportation, and housing, and then you allow a market to build on top of that. The problem is that there's so much selective narrative and selective communication around what individualism is and what people deserve versus the compounding history of the limited probability of success if people don't have access to certain things. That every time something good is done for a community, people can only think of how this affects me today and fear-mongering around it, as opposed to how this is going to affect everyone tomorrow. So I've got 1,000 ideas for that. I work specifically a lot in policy consulting, and I think we could build a better world fucking tomorrow if we really wanted to. But I think fundamentally, there's a lot of selfishness and hero style ego in how people view community, how people view country, how people view economics, and place a lot of their personal self-worth on being better than other people.
Oh,
so
yeah.
they have access to certain things, and that I think that's wholesale bullshit. Yeah,
and when you, so I want to compound on that. So when you take that attitude of, you know, wanting to be better and do that, and you put it into a society to where basically the concept of the individual has been dissolved and everybody has this kind of group identity.
that's
So
not a thing though.
But that's where we're at now. I mean,
That's
nobody.
That is definitely not true. So I've allowed you, and I'm completely okay with you explaining both your understanding of leftist ideas and why they make you think the way you do, which I think 1 equals 2, which is great. Most of the people, it would bug me if you thought something different and then it didn't build to something that was in line with that. But your thoughts make sense because your fundamental understanding and your fundamental thoughts on what both leftists and Marxists and all that shit ideas are based in an eroding of any type of individualism, by the sound of it, which isn't true. That's not collectivist labor has nothing to do with you're not having an individual identity. And I'm confused on how like these two things are crossing paths with you.
I have not seen any welcoming of an individual's identity.
What do you mean?
I don't see that. I see people being judged for who they are. Like automatically, I get a lot of being dismissed because of who I am. My opinion, I'm just saying.
You get dismissed because you were part of an account called fucking Free Black Thought, and you're a white dude.
I'm talking about Jason Littlefield for
the
past several years.
Pardon. I was like, my interactions with you are internet and contextual, but pardon.
Yeah.
So you're saying in general in your everyday life, yeah.
And other people, and
yes.
And I talk with other people. They're like, yeah, I'm no longer my proper noun. I'm no longer valid for who I am as a whole person. And if I don't believe X, Y, and Z, I get labeled this horrific thing. So that's a thing that is happening in this society right now. And the reason why I'm really not a fan of collectivism is because anytime the group is seen as primary over the individual, then that increases the human capacities for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty, and allows us to harm each other.
You're mixing up a bunch of fucking ideologies, my man.
No, I'm just,
and by that I mean,
I'm not talking about ideologies. I'm just talking about.
I'm saying in terms of collectivism and how it's utilized in group and ideology. So collectivism is a labor movement. It's not social movements come with that. Don't get me wrong. And social movements are often integrated into labor movements. But collectivism is about collective power and collective use power and the labor power in the workforce. That's really about it. It's not about collective identities. Collective identities get divvied out, on the other hand, from everyone else. And then you have to identify how a lot of the times how people are prejudiced against, and pretending that doesn't exist is problematic. And there's individualism in each collective identity that gets prejudiced against on a macro scale. Yes, sure. And I'm not saying something doesn't exist, because we're dealing with millions to billions of people. So it does exist, but the probability in terms of the scope of what we're doing, it's not a lot of it, like of people telling you aren't you because you can't be you. That's not the meat behind the belief structure.
But it's the core of it.
No, it's not. That's literally what the meat is, the core. So like the belief structure isn't saying you can't be you, man. And if you're basing your beliefs on arguing with like 17 to 19-year-olds online, then fucking that's on you. But
well,
like
I'm also no, I don't. Hey, you know I don't argue with people online.
Hey man, I'd love to talk to you in person. I'm like, well, fuck off. But yeah, I got you.
No, it comes with me. One of the examples I use is how I was rejected by my former working group that all believed in the ideology. But once I started like, hey, I have a question about this. And then when I pointed out that this is a complete rejection of human dignity, and it's ripping us apart, and we should really talk about this, it got that I lost friends, and I was completely excommunicated from people for saying, hey, can we? So I know that for my.
What was the topic? Do you remember?
Man,
I know it was a long time ago, but yeah.
It was honestly just almost a daily thing. Like I wanted to talk. I tried to ask these questions when they were pertinent.
Yeah.
Just to try to engage in conversation, and the way that I was treated, and also the way that other people around the country are being treated for saying, hey, what if we use the classical liberal tools? What if we use that framework to fix our solution?
Constantly using terms like classical liberal tools will always get you in a point where you're not communicating what you think you are to people.
Tell me more about that.
Well, what do you mean by classical? Like, if I'm saying, hey, we should dismantle things, and you say you're dismantling classical liberalism, and I'm thinking of uh, I'm thinking of how prejudice works in a bunch of different systems, and maybe building them backwards to have a better way for more people to get involved in society. And I hear from you that that's going to go against the classical liberal way. And I'm like, the classical liberal way is to be prejudiced. Like, it's when it's in an interjection.
Gotcha.
It's always better to explain what you mean by it. Like,
okay.
I definitely dive into those fucking exhausting circles. But like, what do you mean when you say classical liberal?
Thank you for that. Just the core values and virtues and thoughts that make up the belief system that the individual is the moral and political center of society. That the individual, like for example, that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, live a virtuous life, that there is an objective truth, those types of systems. Not systems, but those ideas, the ideas that believe that the individual is worthy, the individual maybe even divine, that the individual has a sense of purpose, and that is the primary unit for the society.
Do you think there's space for understanding and respecting the individual, but also understanding that the world is separated by groups?
100%. And here's where I think our collective we needs to distinguish. We have to one has to be a priority.
No. Wait, why? For what? For who and for what? Like, who's the priority? What's it for? Like,
for our understanding and our structuring. What do we hold as the most fundamental aspect of the individual? The most fundamental aspect of us is the most fundamental aspect of us to pursue our lives Jason, in a way that's meaningful to us. Now,
how does that work when people are layered and nuanced? I am one of 5 kids. I've got 10 nieces and nephews. I've got probably 30 people that are like surrogate family. We're a military family. We collected people as we moved around. We're big on community. People are my thing. I'm generally way more short online because being affable is my easiest skill, and I love to talk to people. That said, I believe there's circles of communication, circles of influence, circles of give a fuck that judge on whether we consider someone evil or not, whether we consider someone good or not. And it's, personal, community, society. And everyone has all 3 of those things. And I don't think we can prioritize one or the other. I think I come from a family that's like, God, country, family, sports, or family, God, country, sports, depending on who you are. But I think those are all equally important. Just depends on the context, right? Like, my country is vital. Agreed. You bash in my door right now and try to rob me, I'm not worried about my country. My personal space is what's vital.
Yeah.
You attack my family, My societal space is what's vital. And I don't think we're going to get anywhere productive if we're trying to, at any point in time, create a hierarchy when there doesn't need to be one. It's ideas and end goals. If we're focused on the ideology of what's more important, we're not focused on the ideas of like, is that a good fucking idea? Is that a bad idea? Right? Does that make sense? Am I?
Yeah, no. I was with you for most of
80%
that.
of it.
Most of, I was with you for most of that ride. I tailed off the last couple
Understandable.
of minutes, but I do believe, and I don't want to treat it like a hierarchy, but I do believe that we have the belief that people should have the right to live their lives in a way as not to harm each other.
Okay. Sure.
And so the current social justice world
Mm-hmm.
at its core
Mm-hmm.
seeks to destroy that.
How so? Specifically.
Well, by getting rid of
Like that's a pretty adamant. Like that's pretty um pretty big statement. So like if and the social justice movement is a real broad umbrella. So like
real broad, yeah.
But even then, in that very fucking broad umbrella,
Yeah.
with the hundreds of millions, we'll say 100 million people that are in that umbrella, what specifically are they doing or proposing that undermines what you're saying, or that supports what you're saying?
I would have to go back and the books I've read and the trainings that I've
DEI training is gonna fucking suck. But like that's sure we can agree.
But I'm just
things.
saying that's where the ideas are starting to be kicked down the road. Like those are the ideas that are out there, and you and I see those as like, yeah,
that is DEI training is not not the foundation of ideas for a larger society, and it isn't the incubator for ideas that end up getting shot up and parabolically spread. So like I don't think I've ever seen a bunch of DEI training where people were like, well, time to start a revolution.
I have had I have had revolutionaries in different trainings, but I'm saying
revolutionaries are going to be revolutionaries, but I mean the training itself. Like but sure, if your argument is against DEI training, which at times, not always, but at times can be very cringy. Agreed. I can 100% agree with that.
And it's just the tools that they're using. It's just the philosophies and practices of this new, intersectionality.
How so? Well, give me an idea how intersectionality is problematic.
The very first thing that it does is it strips away the individual.
What? How does intersectionality make people less valuable for their individual contributions?
Because the individual is lumped into a group identity, and every individual within that group assumes the given traits of that group.
I feel like we're having in an understanding of NFL interview processes or affirmative action moment. Most intersectionality clauses are about, say you normally interview only from Yale business major graduates, and you're like, man, that's real weird that 90% of the guys we hire are white guys. And they're like, yeah, well, you hire only from really this very specific case of people. And a lot of intersectionality and affirmative action style initiatives are about being like, all right, hey, you've got a baseline standard. You just have to look for more than one place. You have to interview, just see one fucking black person, see one person that is qualified under the same basic standards, does the same things, but may not come from the small hole that often, especially in the US, was built with racial lines. You normally look through that lens with. So being a part of a group doesn't undermine your ability to also be an individual.
But if your group is the primary, then you can't be that. You can't be that individual.
What do you mean? So you're saying that you can't, if we're getting into specifics, if you're a white dude and you are the primary, you can't be an individual because they're separating everyone else into groups, and you're the opposite of all of those groups. Does that make sense?
Say it one more time for me.
If you're a white dude and you're like, cool, if hypothetically speaking, you're a white dude, if you're a white dude and then everyone else gets their groups, right? Women of color, men of color across the scale. You're saying like, hey, it's white dude as a blank slate, and then a bunch of other individual categories.
It's not just white dude as a blank slate. It's,
well, I mean, but you're saying if you're the primary. I'm trying to understand that statement. If you're the primary group.
I didn't mean anything like primary group.
Yeah, I just mean by like majority group. Like if you're the, I didn't assume that was a hierarchy scale. I just assumed you meant like if it's mostly white dudes and they're trying to add some type of inclusion to it, then the white dudes get grouped up in one group, and everyone else kind of, even if they're grouped in smaller groups, they're grouped in smaller groups.
Well, I'll say that's happened to all of us on a societal level. Like all of us,
until we get to the point where we're fucking measuring and talking and we've got enough information for everyone at all times. That's how societies are going to run, where there are millions of us.
So what we have to do, I think, is if that's how it's going to be, we could still prioritize our individuality and the individuality of others, and still recognize and honor the dignity of everybody. Because as soon as
for social shit, but what's that mean policy wise? Like what does that mean in specific? Because what I argue for, what I talk for with activists is about policy shit. How can we get more education to everybody? How can we get more financial tools to everybody? How can we impact housing? Things like that. So like on the individual scale, what's that mean in towards helping people? Like, how does that work? What's an idea that
how do you
focus on that mindset that does shit that helps people be people in society?
Okay, so think about when that group of people is coming together for whatever their cause is.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if everybody that came to the table has different strengths, different talents, and different resources that they can use for that cause.
That's true in almost every big group. That's why they come together.
Right. But what I'm saying now is groups are doing that for the sheer purpose of eroding individual. Like, that's the end game to this.
That's where you're losing me. They're doing that to erode individualism. That you're shooting the moon.
When you look at the policies of the and the technological advances of the fourth industrial revolution, and when you read,
my man, I am literally the exact person to talk to for this shit. What policies? What tech advances? Like we can record this. We're on a recording, but we can just fucking look it up if you want. Look some shit up and share it. Like I have absolutely no problem with you being like, this policy does this, this, and this. But that saying activism, step 2, read more activism, step 5, erode policy for individualism. I'm the exact wrong person to do it with because I know that shit. And that's where you're missing me. Like, I don't think that they're doing that. And it seems like an easy enemy to have when the enemy, it sounds like, is deep late stage capitalism.
Tell me, I've heard that expression a couple of times. Tell me more about the deep late stage capitalism.
The mass exploitation of both people, their labor, their experiences, the undermining and undercutting of collectivism and group labor power, the exploitation, again, of both your attention at all points in times, the assertive ideology that allows you to be lonelier and lonelier, especially as a man in society, while also pushing ideas of what you should be as a man in society. All those things compound on each other. I
don't know if that last one. Tell me how that last one ties into
male loneliness and late stage capitalism.
Yeah,
they're one and the same, my man. A lot of the ideologies around selective individualism and lack of collectivism, of what you should have and what you should do, and the selective views for an ideal society and an ideal man in that society are pushed in the same capitalistic framework that they exploit people with. It's in our marketing, it's in our movies, it's in our everything. And luckily, I think in the last decade or so, there's been a more assertive pushback against, typical male bullshit in terms of not being able to communicate, not having good friends, all that comes with that. And being able to build a better community that allows you to be a human and build from that. But doesn't mean, we still don't have a couple hundred years of what it is. And the powers that be and the monies that be aren't still there.
Mm-hmm.
Little things like, I know off the top of my head, probably 7 to 8 in societal expectations, especially for American men, 7 to 8 women who have moved back with their parents to help save for a house. And not even a question. Cool, do it. If I can move back with my parents to save for a house, great. But in a single dating world, like, I would be fine because I'm fucking social. But most guys I know couldn't get past that hump themselves. They would say, like, I still live with my parents, even if it was for smart financial reasons. Even if it wasn't, it shouldn't fucking matter. But if it was for smart financial reasons, would you agree with that? Like, it's a societal expectation that's different for men and for women?
I want to say yes, but I also want to think about how and
Okay.
how it's and then again I even want to question, like, is there societal pressure, or is that just bullshit that we place on ourselves,
It's all of the above, my man.
you know?
Yeah,
Because
it's a not an either or, it's a yes and.
and
Um,
I,
I think a lot of the bullshit we place on ourselves because of what we learn from what we read, what we see, what we learn from the men around us. Um, and again,
and
I think it's been getting better and better. But
and what we've been given from the bullshit narrative that's really been part of keeping us and humans divided for a long time.
like what? But yeah, agreed. But yeah, sure. I know way too many men um, who have deep seated insecurity and emotional issues and don't have the verbiage or uh, the framework to properly communicate how they're feeling when they're frustrated, when they're fucking sad,
Yeah.
um, uh, when they miss someone that's platonic. Fuck. Like I luck out. I've got great male friends. I'm really close with my brothers. I'm really close with my dad. Uh, but I remember quite specifically saying, like, a friend I haven't seen in a long time was like, "Hey, bro, I miss you. Let's fucking hang out." And him being immediately weird about it just because I was a dude. And I was like, "It's okay to say you miss me." I knew exactly what had happened there, and it's a little bit of a lack of being able to communicate emotionally and underlying homophobia that any of that communication means automatically you're gay. Um, which sure, man, if all it takes for you to be attracted to men is someone saying that they miss you, then maybe maybe you're gayer than you think you are. But that's a whole separate conversation you can have with yourself on its own. It's that lack of foundation that allows people to both develop and communicate and build better community that I think that was inherent in the early fucking 1900s and male messaging and how we do it. And then it gets real cyclical of ideal male bodies, ideal male situations, and all of that. And that shit is toxic and sells like mad for dudes, and breaks down what we need and what we want a lot.
Yeah. I I see it. I see most of the things in our culture working against what's best for all of us.
That's fair. Makes some people a lot of fucking money though. Um, we got to one tweet, and I don't even think we got through it, but we might as well. Let's see. We need to chill with the Marxism. Whiteys need to chill with the Marxism and using black people as political pawns as well. They have to realize that they are doing this. So, is the presumption in this tweet that whiteys don't realize that there's a lot there, but
So this was in response to one of
this
my
could be
friends.
entirely tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Cool.
If I noticed that the original response, what I was responding to, was not included when this grab was taken.
Bro, we got the internet. I can find it if you
Okay.
want me to. But
I was just responding to somebody saying, basically calling out and being a little.
unfortunately, the account that you were responding to is suspended. So
Oh,
yeah,
I wonder where he went. That's wild. He wasn't, dude. He wasn't even.
but was he though?
Most of the times he dad jokes and sports was
that's fair. Hey, look, man, I've told people, I'm like, I don't interact with that account besides to mock it because they're full of shit. And someone's like, oh, he's great with me, and I'll send them some screenshots, and they're like, oh shit, my bad. So like maybe you got a limited view of them. We'll move on. Like this fucking tweet's a nightmare. And a couple of things.
yeah. Tell me what's a nightmare about it.
What's this idea in the black community that education is white?
Yeah, that is an idea that is there. It's something that me and my friends in high school talked about in the 90s and all throughout the early 2000s up until 2010. I used to talk about it with my high school students, and I had a mentor. It's something I really like. Why is this an idea? And one of my mentors went to high school in the 60s, and he was a black man. And he told me, he said, I remember before that idea, and then I remember after that idea. And I'm not saying that everybody believes that idea. I'm not saying that idea is true, but I'm saying that that is an idea that is in the world.
So I think that's an unfair way to approach that type of conversation, because saying the idea is in the world's a big place, man. Yeah, I can say that about literally anything. We can find the idea out there in the world, but the presumption is that the idea is prevalent. The idea is...
Why are you saying that the presumption? Because I'm not making any presumption.
You are. No, I'm not saying all black people don't value education. What I'm saying that an idea was embedded in the black community, probably by a white racist or white communist. We'll get to that. That education is white. The presumption in your statement is that it's prevalent enough that it's an issue, right? It's not one person that has the idea. That's fair?
It's fair that it's been an idea that's been impacting children for many and adults many generations.
So you're saying it's prevalent and you don't want to define the black community, but you're completely okay with saying it here.
Because that was the term being used up above all throughout.
Okay.
And it's
you're just being in line with how people are talking. Okay. But have you looked at any of, like, you say you've been talking about this for a while now. Have you looked at any of the stats about values in education for black families?
I haven't looked at any stats about values.
I'll send them over to you. Mansa, who did this, is one of the reasons this irritates him so much is it's a ready and heavy talking point about people with black communities about how they don't value education when education's valued real high among black families and in black communities. That's
been my experience as well.
Okay, if that's been their experience, why would, like, even this statement implies that this isn't your experience? Like, you can see how I would read that and I don't know that this is your experience.
But that is my experience, and I am curious about that idea. Why was that poisonous, toxic idea put there, and why do some people believe it? Like, that's something that I'm interested in, because I have worked with people that believe that about themselves.
anecdotal experience aside, I understand that that is what's fostered your interest, and that's what's gotten you like, hey, you believe this about this.
I
And
mean, when you
don't get me
spend
wrong,
21 years in public education, you're around a lot, and you see a
yeah,
lot of the missteps where the system.
sure, absolutely. I'm thinking of there was, I think, a generation of and a half of nerd culture in general, um, black cool culture, nerd culture, and everyone's nerd culture, and how all of society dealt with nerds and what that meant in a time frame where pretty much everyone kind of shat on nerds as like a method of travel. It was in popular media, it was in consistent media, um, and it was definitely in Black communities because they were a microcosm, not a microcosm, but they were an integrated part of American society. I think, don't get me wrong, there was a huge portion of talking white. Sure. Heard it from Black people, heard it from white people, heard it from way more white people than Black people, but I definitely heard it from Black people too. Um, because biases are learned from macro communities. Um, I'm just confused. Like if you fundamentally know, right, that education is a valued thing among Black communities, uh, like saying this doesn't imply that at all. And I think I looked right after you said this. Sorry, I looked right after you posted this. If there was a follow up of like, in communities and Black communities, education's really valued. Blah 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 blah. If you went to expand it, but I didn't see any of that expansion. So it's just this. So like from my point of view, how can I take this outside of anything but it being presuming that education is not important to Black communities?
I think what we just did was, like, you asked me that question, and we clarify it,
Yeah, but
that's
like it's
not
not the
that's
messaging you're
not
putting out there, my man. Like if your goal is for that better unity, right? Uh your your goal is to build that better communication standard, that better unity, that better like, and that's not, if every person has to talk through you to get a better clear of your messaging, then that's not going to get there. Like how at any point would I get that you believe that the Black community actually cares about education from a statement like this? Uh, like
well,
this statement inherently by a lot of its fucking verbs implies that it doesn't.
but it also just, I think the implications uh,
Hmm.
are seen through the lens in which you view the world.
Yeah.
I see it as just just a statement that is stating a true idea.
That's
And there was no, and also this is, I want to go back to, this is Twitter. This is a tweet
mhm.
from a while back, and there was no further communication.
My man. This wasn't 7 years ago. It was a year ago.
Right.
but
And
but
but what I'm saying is, I don't
okay. So on
just
that same note, how do you expect people to respond if it's Twitter? Sure. How do you expect people to respond to it without
I I
any
I
framing
don't
in context?
I don't have any expectations of people should respond this certain
Mm,
way. If people have questions like they do, I say, okay, let's figure them out.
okay, so better question then. Um, would you consistently expect people respond to this in a hostile way, considering it's both inaccurate in its representation and its implications?
Could I see how people would react in hostile ways?
Uh-huh.
If they made that presumption, if they made the same presumption that you did about it, then I
That
could see how people
that
would
it's
be.
saying what it's saying. I'm not injecting anything you didn't say in this tweet that's not there, right?
But earlier you said the presumption was that I didn't think that Black people valued education.
Yeah, no.
So
The
you
presumption
had
after you read it,
that in your makeup
after I read
as
it. Like that's the messaging that comes across, because the first thing you said, no, I'm not saying, no, I'm not saying all Black people don't value education. What
because
I'm
that's what I
saying
was
is
being
that,
accused of.
yeah, because definitely some Black people value education. That's not that
So
exact phrase is not an implication of saying, hey, the vast majority of the Black community thinks that education is one of the few tools for upward mobility, which is very, like, overwhelmingly true.
I agree to that statement,
And
but that doesn't
what I'm saying is that the
doesn't
idea
relate to
itself was
the
embedded in the Black
conversation.
community, which we can get to the second sentence now if you like. But the idea itself was embedded in the Black community, probably by a white racist or white communist, that education is white. And I think in general, that's a conflation of cultural shit talking versus cultural prioritization. And when people are like, hey, you sound white, that's very different than saying Black parents don't think education is important.
Yeah, and I never said that or alluded to that or thought that.
When you say education is white, what do you mean then? Like, what is this alluding to? What I'm saying, what is the idea that Black community, that education is white? What are you alluding? Like, what's that mean then? If it's not implying that the Black community doesn't think education is important because it's white.
Okay, so there's this idea that education is white,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's this idea that that's bullshit. Education is the key to our success.
Yes.
Both of those ideas are not just in the Black community, but I guess those ideas are everywhere. So I
Those
can't
ideas are inherent in the white community in terms of how we've built society. Yes.
since there's those, that's two different completely frame of thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and both of them are out there in the grand scheme black community. Both of those are there. No, I don't know. There's not a
I'm not asking you for what they
preference.
mean in terms of preference, especially for the Black community. I'm asking what you mean by this statement. So
I mean,
when you say specifically, what I'm saying is that an idea was embedded in the Black community that education is white. What do you mean by that?
pursuing degrees, talking white, uh, doing homework.
So yeah, so being
Those
education
things.
being a priority. So I'm not wrong. I'm not fucking mishearing you. So the prioritization of education being important is a white thing, is what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm
Getting
saying,
degrees,
what I'm
doing
saying
homework.
is, what
What do
I'm
you?
saying is I have seen it be called that. I have seen Black people say you doing that is acting white.
Sure.
I have seen that.
Okay.
I've talked with other people that have seen it,
Okay.
trying to figure out why is that a thing? That idea is false and it should not be out there.
Yeah, that is a tangent, not quite what I'm asking though. When you say education is white right here, you're saying education is prioritized in a white way, right? Like you're not, and that white way is prioritizing it in general.
I'm saying some people believe that.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't believe that.
I didn't say you did, but that's what you're saying here, right? And you're saying the idea was embedded in the Black community. You're not saying it's prevalent. I'm trying to rework what you said. You're not saying it's prevalent. You're not even saying it's prominent, but that it's there and that it exists.
That it was placed there and it exists.
And then the follow up is that it was placed there by white people.
Yeah, I don't know. I said probably. That was me taking a dig at white people
I
because
feel like your general digs are at a certain type of white person that that's where your jokes lie, and so I'm not going to dive into those jokes specifically because I don't think you understand the inherent insults in them, and that's not your intention.
right. I have no intention of being harmful.
Yeah, no. It's the get off the plantation jokes as if Black people don't fucking know any better. You don't make them, but I'm sure you've seen them online. I don't know if you made them. I haven't searched you for them.
I don't know what that. Tell me more what you mean.
The get off the Democratic plantation because you don't understand the history of socioeconomics and you don't understand the policies that you're voting.
I don't do that because I believe that I don't call anybody Democrats or Republicans or I don't have that lens. So
okay, sure enough. You do have that lens for white leftists. That's a bit of a lie.
Say it again.
I said you do have that lens for white leftists, but that's fine. It's where your jokes come from, my man. It's completely fine that you have it, but it's not how you view macro society in general. And when you're looking through things, is what you're saying.
How is not? What is not how I examine society?
I said you do have that lens when you're looking at white leftists. It's where the vast majority of your jokes come from in terms of what we're looking at.
Yes. If that's where
you're going to poke fun at.
That's where the funny is coming from right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There are people that if you're going to take some liberties and poke fun at, it's going to be white leftists, and it's specifically white leftists, because you think they are fundamentally a problem both with society and then how they're communicating and integrating with the Black community.
I can't. No,
it's not wrong, but it's not fully right.
I can't. I can't apply blanket rules.
That's fair. Yeah, there's going to be
you know what I'm saying? Like I can't.
Sure.
Anytime I like try to think, no.
We're talking from a 30,000 foot view.
Right.
There is exceptions to every rule. I think people are nuanced. I don't think in general blanket.
I don't think they are. That's what I was going to say. I don't think they are bad people, but I do think that the ideas they are advancing are not for the benefit of our
version of their ideas.
From what I've read, from what I've seen, and from conversations that I've had.
Yeah, I've just had one of these conversations with you about collectivism and individualism, and again, I'm not sure. I feel like you're imposing what you think people believe.
No, what I'm imposing. That's good. What I'm imposing is just the rules and of the ideology. Like the yeah, I just apply and look at the rules and not how people intend to use those tools.
Isn't that a little bit uh an easy way to dishonestly represent people? Because like I could give a fuck less what you say you believe, but how you're gonna use it, those tools, that policy, how that impacts macro society is what's actually important, right?
I would say that I believe people's attitudes and the way that they act and behave
Yeah.
in the culture is more important than policies.
Policies are Paul. What you're voting for and how you change things. Like, what policies do you vote for? Like I could care less what your base ideology says. As I said, I don't care what you label yourself. What policies do you vote for? What policies do you present to set on, if you're an activist, on any form of the spectrum to change society? That's how I can judge. I feel like it's a healthier way to judge people in what they want and what they say they want. And so, like, policies are a part of that. But if you're saying, act in integration, your attitudes towards how you act towards things, I think we have to add to that reciprocation, as well as general empathy towards policies that affect people in ways that we didn't expect. Like if you're unwilling to adjust your policies because they had an outsized effect on a group that you just didn't fucking think of, and you're like, well, you gotta figure it out. I'm less empathetic towards your situation and your approach towards things, just because your solution didn't figure shit out for people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope so. I try to approach things at least consistently. Like, end of the day, I'm heavy ideas over ideology. What you say consistently. I'm like, well, that's pretty shitty consistently. What you vote for consistently, I don't care what you say you are. If you vote for shitty things all the time, well, it doesn't really matter what you say to me, because this is what affects, macro life and macro policy. And I try to go from there.
That's a good process.
Thanks, man. We can go through a bunch of other shit, but it's already 7:00. We're 2 hours in. And I think I need to eat dinner and go on a run and do all that shit. I've been sipping whiskey, and I'm at that point where if I keep sipping, I can't work out.
Dude, you're a better man than I am if you've been drinking whiskey and you're talking about going for a run.
I not better, but I've got aesthetic goals to hit, and I know where my ego is, and so I place goals right behind where my ego needs to be, and my ego will make sure I show up for things.
There you go.
But yeah, I'll wrap this up and I'll send it over to you probably in the next 30 minutes. I don't know how long it takes Google to fucking do its thing.
For sure. Well, before we go, I want to see if where just kind of where we landed versus where we went into this.
So I feel like my understanding of your both approach on these topics and societal topics in general is you have a fundamental belief in that most leftist policy undermines and erodes individualism, and the end goals are going to be detrimental for how society is going to be in the future.
And Can I? Yes, you
Yeah,
captured
please.
that well. I want to change individualism to our individuality. I just want
Okay.
to put
Yeah.
just a
Uh,
little, because it's everybody, and it's the people born 50 years from now.
yeah. Yeah.
Those are that's it. But yeah, that's definitely it. And I hope that you don't see any ill intent or intentional and purposed blind
No,
spots that I'm throwing up.
I mean this in the most what's the term? Dictionary straightforward way possible, not in an insulting way. I think it's willful, very blindful ignorance on how you're looking at these topics. And by that I mean just like, no, you're not a dick. You have certain blinders that you look through the world on, and you've decided that those blinders are how you're going to view things. And that explains pretty much everything else you've said. Um, which, like, those are all consistent. Your beliefs are consistent with each other because your foundational belief is that thing. And if I believed that thing, I could understand believing the other things that you've said. I get that. That's consistent. That's moral and ethically consistent with how I think people should travel in the world, um, and how I think you're traveling in the world. That makes sense to me. And so I don't think you're again. I don't think you're a bad person. I just think that that's just a narrow fucking view on how we're going to deal with both these problems currently, these problems from the past, and these problems in the future. Um, and it's a lot of the reasons why I asked for solutions. I'm like, all right, cool. How are we going to fix this? Give me your idea to fix this, because I've got 1,000 ideas for everything, because it's who I am as a person. And we can do another follow-up call and just like talk about like, hey, this one subject, let's talk about future tech and how we would expand, or let's talk about how individuality works with collectivism and how these things aren't really out of clash, or if we think they're out of clash, where those clashes are, where the disconnect is. And what that means in reality, as opposed to, I think, what too often happens, people talk in philosophical bullshit instead of like what that means in policy, what that means in people's lives, what that means in day-to-day shit. And so like I think I've got a good idea of like who you are, how you approach, why you approach it that way. And it makes sense to me. And so like I get it. But if you have any questions, I would love to answer. Pardon.
Uh, Man, I don't have any questions, but this has been I appreciate it very much so. I'm tired of living in a world of people just throwing darts, and I'm like,
Hey
man,
man, you said some shit. You gotta fucking if you're
no,
gonna
I
we'll talk to you.
I agree. Sometimes I want conversation. I crave conversation,
There,
and
Jason, I'm gonna tell you this from someone who's been on the internet for a long time, and I understand there are tiers and groups. The problem is with the tier and group you found, especially uh with like Mansa, Miss Robin, that entire group, heavy conversationalists. I'm in probably 4 group chats with different of them on different conversations. Would love to talk shit out. Would love to take people like, hey, you've got a different point of view. You have a different belief structure. Would love it. But to survive in the internet world, you have to be very aware of people who communicate in the methods, means, and ways of people that are attention grifters and fucking the worst. And you end up building a decent filter for that shit. And if you communicate sometimes in that way, people are just gonna be like, "Cool, fuck off, man." Like, because the chances of you being uh, an interested conversationalist who's actually actually interested on the topic and considerate and genuine about it are, we'll say, sub 10%, sub 5%. So like if you're dealing with thousands, the larger your account gets online, the more the bigger your filter gets. You're dealing with thousands of interactions at a time. People are like, okay, you communicate in a way, in a style, in a communication style consistently in some way, and people are just going to write you off. And if you want conversations, most of them are just going to say fuck off. I said fuck off to you, and Miss Robin was like, hey, look, you should probably talk to him just in case maybe we're missing him, because she's genuinely a better person than I am. And I was like, all right, fine. Like, I'll reach out, because I am notorious for having a short leash on Twitter.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, no, I don't mind having a conversation with next to anyone. And I get what you're saying, and I get your point of view. Can you talk to me about the pictures behind you?
Uh,
I don't know what I'm looking at.
that is it's the England national rugby team from a really long time ago, maybe the 20s. That is something I picked up at a shop like 30 years ago. This one here is a Ween poster. You ever heard of Ween? Listen to Ween.
Ween?
Yeah.
No, I'm a music nerd, but
you'll either want to gouge your ears out, or you'll be like, this is some pretty weird shit.
How do I spell it?
WEEN. And then that little one over there is the very first Bonnaroo poster.
Oh, dope. Is that a lava lamp?
That is a lava lamp.
Ween's on tour. Oh, I'm not losing my mind. Yeah, I've heard of them. Weird. Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
My bad.
No, that's them.
Yeah, they're doing their thing. And still rocking. Awesome. Well, thanks, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Do it again sometime for sure.
Sounds good. You'll see a link in about 30, and I'll see you on Twitter.
Cool, man. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.